Friends, today we are finishing up our sermon series called Unafraid, and we're doing so by looking at our fears of sickness, aging, and death. I would just remind you that if you missed any of the sermons in this series, and if you'd like to take a look at them, they are accessible from our website as well as from our Facebook page, and we invite you to do that if you're interested in doing so. So I am reading today from the Gospel of John, chapter 11, verses 17 through 27, and I'm also reading from the Common English Bible. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was a little less than 2 miles from Jerusalem. Many Jews had come to comfort Martha and Mary after their brother's death. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, while Mary remained in the house. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Even now I know that whatever you ask God, God will give you." Jesus told her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha replied, "I know that he will rise in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me will live, even though they die. Everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She replied, "Yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Christ, God's Son, the one who is coming into the world." May God add blessing to the reading, hearing, and understanding of these words. Well, friends, we've come to the end of this journey, and throughout this series we have explored a number of things that some of us, indeed many of us, fear. The subjects we have considered were chosen by Reverend Adam Hamilton for his book, and they were based on a survey taken at his church. So the fears he addressed in the book, Unafraid, were the most prevalent fears for the people in his church that they were experiencing at the time. But we know, because of our study of the annual Chapman University Survey on American Fears, that these are not the only things of which we are afraid. And quite frankly, whatever fears we have, we know that we can manage them effectively based on something that Adam puts in his book, 4 very practical and faith-based steps that he recommends to us. And you know what? He makes it easy for us to remember them too by using the acronym FEAR. First, he says, face our fears with faith. The Bible reminds us that we are not meant to live in fear. God said to Abram, "Fear not, I'll be with you always," when God sent him and Sarah to a land they had never seen before. God also said it to Moses, "Fear not, I'll be with you always," when God sent Moses to Egypt to convince Pharaoh to let God's people go. God said it to Joshua and Elijah and Daniel. God said it through the prophets to God's people, Israel. God said it through the angels to Jesus' mother Mary and his earthly father Joseph. And God said it through God's Son, Jesus Christ, to his disciples and to Saul and to others. Throughout the scriptures, God, our Creator, God the Son, and God the Spirit remind us to face our fears with faith, knowing that God is with us no matter what we fear. We are never alone, even when we are afraid. Second, Adam suggests we examine our assumptions in light of our fears. Often, our fears are based on feelings instead of facts, which sometimes makes us think that things are worse than they really are, because we don't have all the facts. So when we gather up the facts and relate them to our fears, we will very likely discover that our fears are not as bad as we thought, and indeed we might even have nothing to fear. Third, he suggests we attack our anxieties with action. Now, this can be hard and scary. But when we attack our anxiety, when we take action against it, and we meet it head on, it gives us great courage and hope. As Eleanor Roosevelt once said, you gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face. You are able to say to yourself, I lived through this horror. I can take the next thing that comes along. And then finally, Adam suggests we release our cares to God. Give your burdens to the Lord, and God will take care of you. We read in Psalm 55, verse 22. And in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7, we hear, give all your worries and cares to God, for God cares about you. When we turn our cares over to the one who can take them away, we are then left with a sense of calm, and we can live our lives without fear. By facing our fears, examining our assumptions, attacking our anxieties, and releasing our cares to God, we experience hope and healing. We are put on a path toward living unafraid. But we still have one more set of fears that we have to tackle, and that is our fear of getting sick, getting old, and facing death. Let's do that now. When we talk about getting sick, we're not talking about things like the common cold or our usual aches and pains. No, we're talking about something much bigger than that. We are afraid of the diagnosis. We are afraid of being diagnosed with diseases like cancer, diabetes, AIDS, heart disease, and even the most recent coronavirus. And our fears are not unfounded, especially when these diseases hit close to home. When someone we know has been diagnosed or even died because of a life-threatening disease, then it really comes closer to home, and we pay more attention to our own symptoms. And when we experience a symptom that we've never experienced before, sometimes our brains go into overdrive, trying to decide what we need to do next. Now, it used to be, back in the good old days, that you had two choices. You either went to the doctor or you didn't, right? But these days, we've become so focused on our health, and because of the technology available to us, we have so many other resources that we can consult in order to check out the status of our own health. And often when we do that, we then start to question our own judgment about what we should be doing with our bodies, and even the judgment of the doctors that we once trusted. If you're like me, when you feel a symptom, you instead go to the Google machine and you search WebMD or Healthline.com or any number of sites that has its own built-in symptom checker. And you type in your symptoms, and suddenly you're whipping yourself into a frenzy of fear because our imaginations don't have to run wild. We can see it right there on the screen. There are 350 different diseases that we might have based upon our symptoms. All right, maybe I'm exaggerating slightly. But it's true. We tend to panic when we start to do these kinds of things. And don't even get me started about all the commercials that we see on TV that are sponsored by the pharmaceutical companies. They are designed to make us think that we have those diseases. It's crazy. It is so easy for us today to diagnose, or more likely misdiagnose ourselves. And when we do that, we end up jumping to conclusions about our health. When it comes to a serious disease, all that jumping to conclusions causes panic, and it makes us afraid. What if instead we faced our fears with faith? We examined our assumptions in light of the facts, attacked our anxieties with action, and released our cares to God. Both of my parents died of cancer. cancer is easily the most dreaded disease of them all. I'm sure you all would agree. But because both of my parents died of cancer, it makes me an easy mark because of the hereditary nature of many cancers that have been discovered over the years. It's also easy for us to overreact about cancer, especially when, as I said before, it hits close to home. My dad died of bile duct cancer. And my mom's was an estrogen receptor positive cancer, much like breast cancer, only not really. So over the years, without even knowing, I was actually following Pastor Adam's formula that we've talked about so far in order to deal with my own fears that I might too be diagnosed with these cancers. First, I faced my fears with faith. I prayed. And I prayed because I truly want to live to a ripe old age. And I continually reminded myself of God's presence and power in my life. And that presence and power gave me the courage that I needed to take the next steps toward being unafraid about cancer. Next, I examined the facts, which involved gathering the facts. Now, after my dad passed away in 2005, I did what many of us do. I consulted the Google machine. And I checked a bunch of websites, but then I decided it was best for me to consult a urologist. And so I did, and that's when I learned that bile duct cancer is not hereditary. One down, one to go. My mother died in 2002. And tackling her particular cancer was much more complicated and difficult. It wasn't very easy for me to find out information about her specific kind of cancer. But because it was related to one of the most deadly cancers known to humanity, breast cancer, I knew I had to find out the facts, and I knew that it was going to be a challenge. Well, first I saw a doctor, and he said to me, if you're taking hormone replacement, get off of it right away. I was, and I did. And then I went right back on again. Because trust me without my hormone replacement, that's ugly. That's really ugly. So then I talked to another physician who reassured me that it was okay for me to continue the replacement that I was doing, and also gave me some other places to get more research on my mother's cancer. I also went through the process of doing genetic testing, which thankfully has me in the clear. All of that has been encouraging. But I know it is not the end. I must continue, and I will continue to get the diagnostic tests to make sure that I don't develop the kind of cancer that my mother died of. In light of the facts that are available to all, we can alleviate our fears. I no longer worry about developing cancer because I know that I have found the facts that I need in order to alleviate my fears. Besides that, you know what worry really is? Worry is grabbing the possibility of something that might happen in the future and bringing it into the present. Or put another way, it's imagining a negative future that may never happen, ever. We also need to remember what Jesus said about worry. Do you remember what he said? Who among you, by worrying, can add a single moment to your lives? Stop worrying about tomorrow, because tomorrow will take care of itself. We know that cancer is deadly, but so are a lot of other diseases. And we should always be concerned about diseases that can do us harm. We should do what we can to avoid a diagnosis. And if we are diagnosed, then we need to do what we can to fight it. But then we need to release our cares to God. We need to lay them at the foot of the cross. We need to ask our Creator, our Redeemer and Sustainer, to take away our fear, even as we attack our anxieties and attack the thing that is making us afraid. If when we do that, when we release our cares to God, sit back and watch what happens to your own well-being. When it comes to our fear of getting older, I don't think that it's the number of candles on a cake that really gets us down. I think instead it's what we think those numbers mean. When we think about getting older, we think about becoming less mobile. We think about having more aches and pains. And we think about not being able to do the things that we used to be able to do when we were 20 or 30 or 40 or fill in the blank. We think that the older we get, the less satisfied we will be with our lives, that we will become irrelevant to our family and our friends, and that we'll miss out on the joys of life. We might even develop dementia, oh joy, or Alzheimer's disease, or something worse. We think that as we age, we will be less happy and our lives will have less meaning. That we're just waiting, we're just hanging out, waiting to die. But you know what? Statistically speaking, none of those things are true. At least not the part about missing out, or becoming irrelevant, or being less happy. You see, according to a Nielsen survey of about 350,000 people between the ages of 18 and 85, it was published in 2016, our perceived well-being actually increases as we age. The folks who participated in the study were asked to rate their overall well-being at that time in their lives and how they felt about their lives on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being low, 10 being high. And here's what they found. Show the graphic. So they started with the ones ages 18 to 21. Their score on a scale of 1 to 10 was 6.7. Not bad for a young person just getting out of high school or maybe getting out of college. But then look what happens as they head to their mid-20s, mid to late 20s. Ages 26 through 29, their score is just 6.4. Maybe in between they got married, had children, new jobs, new responsibilities, and all the stress that goes along with all of that. Well, then look at what happens between ages 26 and 29 to 34 and 37. Their well-being went up slightly, up to about 6.5. Those folks are a little bit more secure in their lives. They're making more money. The kids are starting to grow up. They're having more time to do stuff together. And then look what happens. Teenagers. We go from a score of 6.5 to 6.3 from our mid-30s to our early 50s. And then when we get to our early to mid-50s, what happens then? They leave the house. We're empty nesters in the 50 to 53 age bracket or thereabouts. And, you know, that empty nester syndrome, I don't know if you went through it when your kids left the house, but when ours did, I kind of looked at my husband and said, okay, what do we do now? We've spent the last 20 years raising these kids. What do we do? Well, it takes a while for folks to figure out what that really means, but look what happens after that. As we go through our 50s and 60s and 70s, well into our 80s, our well-being goes way up. And in fact, by the time we reach 82 to 85, their well-being was actually more than it was for the 18 to 21-year-olds. That's amazing, isn't it? Now, of course, some of these results would be contingent upon our health conditions, but clearly they show us that without a doubt, our golden years have the potential to be our best years ever. It's all in what we make of it. And especially for those of us who are people of faith, growing old means having more time and resources to do the things God wants us to do. As we age and are no longer tied down to a job or supporting or raising a family or maintaining a home full time, we can devote more of ourselves to God's mission in the world. We can volunteer more freely. We can give and tithe more generously. We can get more involved in helping others and loving God's people until we reach that point in our lives when we take our last breath and prepare for what is yet to come. Which leads me to our final fear, our fear of death and dying. Since I've been a pastor, I've met with a lot of people who were near death or were facing imminent death. And what I found is that those who were afraid of dying were afraid because of their fear of the unknown. We don't know for certain what happens when we die. Now, we've read about people who have had near-death experiences. In fact, maybe we've known a few. But their experiences are all very different. So what really happens when we die? What happens when we take that last breath? Well, when I was serving as a pastoral intern, I was called to the hospital to visit with one of our church members who had fallen off a ladder while he was taking down his Christmas decorations. He was an older man, and when I got to the hospital, he said he wanted to talk to me privately. So as his wife left the room, he said to me with a quiver in his voice, "You know, I'm a person of faith. I believe in God. I believe in Jesus. I believe in heaven. But I am afraid to die." So I asked him why, and this is what he said. "I think it's because I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what it's going to be like to be dead. So I'm afraid." When he said that, I took a breath and I said a prayer. "Oh God, please give me something. Give me something to give this man comfort." And before I even knew it, these words were coming out of my mouth. "When I was a little girl," I told him, "my mother wanted me to go to summer camp." Now, I had never been to summer camp before. In fact, I had never even been away from home for a night. But she was insistent that I needed to go to summer camp, and even though I was going with my best friend, I was afraid. In fact, I was terrified. Because I had no idea what summer camp was going to be like. What if it was awful? What if it was no fun? What if everybody hated me? What if I got homesick? Wait, what is homesick? I don't even know what that is. I was so terrified of going to summer camp. And then I got there. And it was the most awesome experience of my life. I had so much fun at summer camp. It was a beautiful camp. It was full of nature. There were activities to do. It was unbelievable. In fact, it was like paradise. And you know what? By the end of the week, I didn't want to go home. I think that's what heaven is like. I think it will be awesome. I think it will be paradise. When Jesus was crucified and was hanging on the cross, the criminal hanging next to him said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus replied to the man, "Verily I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Paradise. In Jesus' day, paradise was a Persian term which referred to the king's gardens. The greater the king, the greater the gardens, and it was often filled with water features and exotic plants and exotic animals, magnificent creatures, streams, lakes, and waterfalls. And that was how Jesus was describing heaven. Paradise. a place of great beauty and joy, a place where we can meet Jesus face to face. How do we know? Easter tells us so. God showed us on Easter by raising God's Son from the dead that we have nothing to fear. Easter was God's way of saying to us, I know you're afraid, but you don't have to be, because I am the resurrection and I am life. Believe in me and you will never die. You will have everlasting life. As Christians, we believe this life is not the end. We believe this life is a gift from God, but it's just part of God's great adventure for us. In this life, we work hard, we learn, we do everything we can to seek to know God and to serve God's people to the best of our abilities in every way we possibly can. But when this life is over and we live in the presence of God, as Christians, we know that that is not the end, that this life is not the end, that death is not the end, and what happens on the other side is absolutely glorious. It is indeed paradise. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "What you believe about death changes everything about how you live your life." Let me say that again. What you believe about death changes everything about how you live your life. I believe that the afterlife will be absolutely amazing. It will be summer camp and paradise all rolled into one. And I believe that when this perishable body takes on imperishability, that my heavenly body will be a new thing. That my pain will be gone, my suffering will be gone, then death will be swallowed up in victory. And God's great adventure will be yet to come. I believe it for me, and I believe it for all of you. I believe we will all be in paradise because we are resurrection people. We believe. If you trust in God, if you believe in God's promise, if you believe that this life is not the end, but just the beginning and that the best is yet to come, then you really have nothing to fear. You don't have to be afraid of anything. When we trust in God and we live in the present, we can worry about nothing. We can face our fears with faith. We can examine our assumptions in light of the facts. We can attack our anxieties with action. And we can release our cares to God, knowing full well that God will receive them and will relieve us of our fears and the stress that goes along with them. We can live unafraid. We can live with courage and hope. May God make it so. And all of God's fearless people said, Amen.